I'm Katie Barr, and this is Boca Matters. Today's topic is planned mobility development. What is it, and how is it shaping the future of our city? Joining us to discuss this further is local attorney Steve Utrecht. Steve is a longtime Boca resident and a former member of our Planning and Zoning Council. Hello, Steve. Nice to see you.
Pleasure.
Now, I think we should just get right into it. What is planned mobility development?
Planned mobility development is a new zoning designation used by the city of Boca to allow uses such as housing to go into areas where there are offices and retail, so that the retail, the housing, and the other business interests are close to one another rather than segregated and far apart. And that theoretically will reduce traffic in the long run.
Is it comparable to transit-oriented development?
That's basically a name you've heard elsewhere. Other cities will use a term like that. We use planned mobility.
And what do you think were our original aspirations or goals for enacting planned mobility?
Originally, the goal was to encourage people to walk, bike, and use public transportation more. And the walking, of course, is enhanced if your housing is next to or within walking distance of certain uses that you'll use a lot, like grocery stores or other shopping or even business office uses. So that's what it is.
I mean, what do you like about it and what don't you like about it?
Aspirationally, I think you're going to get new development. New is going to look fresh. It's going to be a way of doing urban redevelopment in areas that need urban redevelopment. And we do have some of those in Boca. But that's what I like about it. What I don't like about it is a little more complicated. It's a little more nuanced to explain. It's that if you're going to add a lot of housing in areas that already have pinched off traffic or overcrowded schools, now you're talking about overloading basic systems, such as the educational system or the traffic system. And traffic mitigation alone isn't going to do it. You're going to need infrastructure improvements. And the more housing you put in, the more infrastructure, the more cost. So in the long run, you take an area like I-95 in Glades, where we just spent millions and millions of dollars to put in new interchanges and widen roads and alleviate some of the congestion. That I-95 Glades Road corridor was just totally overloaded. We're now talking about putting a lot of housing in that corridor, and we're not talking about what really needs to be done, which is redesigning the grid, the entire street grid. And I don't know how you're going to get that done without significant changes in the code, other than just planned mobility. Just by encouraging these uses together, you're not going to take traffic off the road. You're going to add a lot of traffic to the roads,
right.
which is going to require massive changes in the way traffic is routed. And I don't know where you're going to accomplish that without for lack of a better word, a separate tax district or something like that to encourage development of infrastructure.
So part of the mobility, wouldn't that be like buses and other, services to get you to and from the main hub?
Yes. I think it's important to note that the code already has a provision in it that requires a person, a developer that wants to show that they're entitled to the planned mobility zoning designation, that you do an analysis and you determine what are the mobility strategies that are being utilized, and also determine whether mathematically the mobility strategy is reducing the impact on traffic. And what I want everybody to understand is if that's really truly being followed, which I don't think it is yet, but I don't think people know this, and I think they should know that this is the analysis, the proper analysis of how you make a good transit-oriented development or a mobility district, is put the onus on a developer. After all, he's getting an enhancement to the value of his property. Put the onus on the developer to show what those development of those traffic mitigation strategies he's employing are actually going to do. And you don't have to tell him, we want you to build these things. He's going to find a way to build them. He's going to find a way to spend the money, and then you don't have to have this contentious debate about what the roadway, sidewalk improvements are going to cost. He's going to say, I'm going to build them. And some of the applicants that own these properties have built some pretty darn good stuff in this town. Meisner Park being an example. And I'm not going to put it past them to say they can't do it again. I'm just going to say this is the way you make sure that they do it again. And in the future, I think that needs to be the primary focus of everybody on planning and zoning and everybody on the council, to look at these traffic mitigation strategies and see if they're really going to work. Because so far we're just approving apartments, and there isn't really anything new being constructed to mitigate traffic. And this is where we're missing the boat.
And that's the number one complaint if you talk to residents, is the
Yes.
traffic is not decreasing.
Yes and no. I mean, if you live anywhere in South Florida, you realize you've got traffic. So we're not any different. I hate Broward's traffic more than I hate ours, and I hate Dade's even more.
Right.
And I think everything we've done in this town for 40 years has been designed with the hope in mind that we don't end up like that. And it would be a shame if we ignore what's good about planned mobility
Right.
and just approve apartments. I mean, that's what they did in Broward and Dade, and that's why they have a mess. We were going to do it different. We said we were going to do it different, and I don't see that happening yet. And that's my big problem with this so far.
So we have a great opportunity to get it right.
Whether we get it right, we can get it better. I mean, I think that you're going to have more traffic, whether you do this or not. You're going to have more traffic than if you don't do this, but then you're going to be stuck with an older city with, most importantly, I think you got to understand, you can't have a sustainable city if your policemen, your firemen, your teachers, and your retail workers all live in Lake Worth or
Right.
somewhere where they can afford.
Right.
That's too far, and it creates too much traffic. And I think that's what we started with planned mobility. That was the aspirational goal, is you take that reality and you try to avoid the consequences of that reality, or at least mitigate them. And I think that's a very good idea. I think we're missing the boat when we don't really put the emphasis on mitigation strategies and infrastructure improvements. I think if we continue this argument over how many units they can build and don't talk about the other things, we're not going to really accomplish any of the goals of planned mobility. So infrastructure, traffic mitigation strategies, those should be the two primary things that council and planning and zoning looks at. And if they don't see it, they need to have the courage to say, we need to see it. And I think right now there's so little trust between the one side and the other that we're not making any progress on the change. I knew when we basically blew up the walls of zoning and said, come on in and do what you want, they're going to do what they want if we didn't put up new walls. And we haven't really effectively put up enough of requirements. We should emphasize every time somebody comes in with these planned mobility developments, we need to emphasize what are your traffic mitigation strategies, what is the infrastructure you're going to build for these, and frankly, that's just only fair. The land that is being enhanced in value by this ordinance change needs to be reformed, needs to be changed, needs to be modified, and it's not going to get there if all we do is build more density on top of the existing grid. That's my concern.
So the areas in Boca Raton that are zoned PMD, I think there's a lot of confusion even among the residents, because we look at the downtown and you see the explosion of the, development down there. But the downtown is not planned mobility?
No,
or is it?
the downtown has a separate downtown development of regional impact, which is a separate codified legal structure to what can and can't be built there and how much of it can be built there. You've probably seen those formula with how many square feet of office versus how many feet of residential, and you can transfer some of the residential to the office or vice versa, but you never really have more development. You always have a planned amount of development. Well, I think planned mobility is different. And just while we're on the subject of how much development we're going to get, we don't really know. It's, we figured 10 units an acre in, say, Arvida Park of Commerce was enough. And then when that was discussed, how much density we'd have, say, in MidTown, the MidTown owners said they wanted 50 or they were going to sue. And that this was just a shock, I think, to me and to everybody else, that we couldn't have openly worked out a solution to how much density makes sense. And as you know, City Council said, well, we're going to, until we figure out what you're going to build, we're just going to put a cap on it. And that cap theoretically can be lifted if they come along with something good.
Right.
But we haven't seen that plan yet. So now we're in a horrible situation as a city where we're being sued by a developer that we gave all these rights to, and he doesn't, we don't know what they really want to build. We don't know whether it's going to be what we really envisioned as planned mobility. So that's a serious legal matter that I don't really want to comment on. I have pretty strong opinions about it, but we have got to find a way to accomplish goals in this city without this contentious debate that just spins around and goes nowhere.
Right.
And that's what we have right now, and it's not fruitful.
So is there, right now, do we have a limit to the density in the planned mobility area?
One of the things that I was most concerned about and I was most appreciative of is that everybody seemed to be receptive when we started the debate to putting a limit. And we put a limit of 2,500 units. We had all of our Arvida Park of Commerce, and that was the only thing we were looking at the time, was taking somewhat outmoded office park that was somewhat hard to rent for a lot of the owners and making it, well, we'll take the most outmoded parts and they'll become apartments. That's not a bad idea.
Right.
So it's going to create some traffic, and so let's see what we can do to mitigate the traffic. So we made it planned mobility, and we also said, let's test it. Let's test it, and let's put a cap at 2,500 apartment units, which is a lot. But that was something that I really thought we needed to do, is take some baby steps and see how this thing would progress, and put a limit on it. So Arvida Park of Commerce, I think, is 2,000 acres. So, if you take 10 units an acre, that's 20,000 apartments.
Wow.
If you totally develop all the sites. And then what do you got? You don't necessarily have a planned community. You have a lot of separate apartments that are segregated from each other, maybe by walls, by fences, by landscaping, and there's no interconnectivity. So what have you gained? You've just made it more dense, more traffic, and you haven't done anything to enhance mobility. So I thought 2,500 was a good start. Let's see where this thing goes. And unfortunately, where it went was we didn't really get mobility strategies, I don't think, not what I really envisioned when they first started talking about this, because there aren't any new sidewalk initiatives or interconnectivity. You got your sidewalks are on the perimeter of the property, but where's the diagonal crossings? Where's the sidewalks around those ponds that would enhance the community? Where's a wider bike path so people can bike? Where's an internal bike path? We have a long linear bike path, but what about making them like spokes on a wheel so you can go anywhere in the whole Park of Commerce? That would require some minor infrastructure, not that expensive, but we didn't even do that. So then I started thinking, well, if we can't get it right in Arvida Park of Commerce, how's this city ever going to sit down and form a consensus on how we're going to do it in a more complicated area, such as MidTown or the old IBM campus? And so I'm, gravely concerned, but hopefully optimistic at the same time.
What can the city do to firm up the code to make sure everybody's on the same page?
I think we need to emphasize a little more then it's mentioned as one of the aspirational goals of planned mobility. We need to emphasize more the infrastructure that's needed. I can see if I'm a designer and I'm starting with a plat of undeveloped land like as big as Arvida Park of Commerce, I could see with a little doing, you could really build some streets and some bike paths and some pedestrian walkways and some covered porticos and some cooling areas and some park benches in the middle of the place and hydration stations so people can cool off and shaded porticos, and you could do a lot of things, but we're starting with a built-out city and we're trying to retrofit it.
Right.
And that's a challenge. I think, though, that we have a unfortunate situation, and I think when you don't have dialogue and you don't have people understand where you're coming from, the dialogue kind of ends with "No, you're wrong," and "Yes, I'm right," and you can't have both sides insisting that they're right. I like the way the city is now. I certainly believe there's room for improvement. That's what I want, and I think that most people I met want that. But I think that the process of getting from where we were to a more ideal city has been somewhat flawed, and I've been pretty outspoken about it.
Well, as a follower of yours on Facebook, I can say yes, you are. Well, it's been really nice speaking with you, Steve, and hopefully we'll do this again.
Okay, thank you.
That's it for today, everyone. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.